A Polish man has become the first person to recover from having his spinal cord severed after a British-led team helped him to walk again. Darek Fedika was paralysed from the waist down in 2010. But in a startling medical breakthrough, doctors have now helped bring back feeling in his legs and even allow him to drive his car. Now let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail. Our health correspondent Thomas Moore is with me. How did this treatment work, Thomas?
Well, it's based on British research stretching back 40 years. And what the scientists did was to work on cells called olfactory and sheathing cells, which are found in the nose, and they are involved in the sense of smell. But they have another function. They also allow the cells in the olfactory system to be constantly renewed, and that was important. But in the first of two operations, they removed the olfactory bulb and they grew the cells in the lab in a culture. They then went back a second time 2 weeks later and they injected it into the gap in the spinal cord, allowing there to be repair and regrowth.
How did they go about doing that? Because it's very sensitive, isn't it?
Well, what they did was, because the surgeon had been injured in a stabbing, there was a very clean break in his spinal cord, making the repair a little easier. But they cut through the scar tissue here and they injected 500,000 cells in 100 micro-injections on either side.
So this is where the spinal cord was severed.
That's right.
They injected either side of it.
That's right.
How do they go about... They use then another part of the body, don't they, to continue this process?
That's right, the ankle. So what they did was to take 4 thin strips of nerve tissue from the ankle, and they then injected that across the 8mm, that's about 0.3 of an inch, in the gap on the spinal cord. And it's here that the cells go to work and do the magic. They allowed the nerve fibres to regrow, and brain signals went from the brain down to the lower part of the body for the first time.
And we now have a man who couldn't walk. He was paralysed from the waist down. He is now able to walk again. There is hope. What happens next with this? So
there is still some cynical scientists who would say this might just be a one-off. You need to prove it in a clinical trial, so that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to do this in 10 more patients. They're going to endeavour to show that this is something that could be used on a practical basis for people with spinal cord injuries. The scientist himself says he hopes that one day you're going to be looking at a scrap heap of wheelchairs. It's not going to happen in his lifetime, but this is the very start of something very significant. That
there could be a cure for paralysis.
Indeed.
Thomas Moore, thank you.
And with me now is Raquel Siganporia, who is the Vice Chair of the Spinal Injuries Association. She was partially paralysed after an operation. Welcome to you indeed.
Thank you.
How big a breakthrough do you think this is?
Well, without doubt, the scientists who have made the breakthrough today are to be commended on their actions. In terms of somebody who's become paralysed 20 years ago, for me, this is a very good first step, and it really is just that. It's a first step into reversing the long-term effects of paralysis.
Because as I understand it, this was a very clean-cut wound, and most people with spinal injuries leading to paralysis have much more complex problems.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people become paralysed through clinical adverse effects and incidents, or through some sort of vehicle collision or a fall, in which case it's not so clean-cut in terms of where the spinal cord is being damaged. My own experience is that I actually suffer from cord ischemia, so my cord is perfectly intact. It's just been constricted at a point in time which resulted in the paralysis.
And that it's not therefore a question of necessarily regenerating cells, or would that help you, as has happened in this case?
My understanding is at the moment there is very limited scope as to which type of people can be assisted through this type of breakthrough, the sort that we're seeing today. People like myself might have to wait a little bit longer to see the full effects reversed.
What other therapies are you aware of, or treatments are you aware of for people who have paralysis?
I think in terms of the word paralysis, when people talk about that, it doesn't just encompass the fact that you can't walk. It actually encompasses the fact that you end up with bladder dysfunction, bowel dysfunction and sexual dysfunction. So when you're asking me about what is there out there to treat and reverse the paralysis, there isn't. anything. When you become paralysed at the moment, at this point in time, it is permanent. There are a lot of things out there where people are researching ways to try and reverse the effects of paralysis, but nothing that completely tackles all four aspects as we know them to be at the moment.
So in a sense, the work on repairing the spinal cord and repairing the spine has to be the focus. There is no alternative.
Absolutely.
And as far as living with paralysis is concerned, yes. Everyone saw the case of the film star Christopher Reeve and all that. I mean, clearly people would like to recover the use of their limbs, but do you think it's helpful, sort of, as it were, being focused on these medical breakthroughs?
I think the only way we're going to move forward is if we are focused on these medical breakthroughs. But I think for people out there tuning into your programme, I think the message I'd like them to take home is that it's not just about being able to walk again. And actually, if you asked a lot of people maybe a year or two after they've become paralysed what they would like, whether they'd like their bowel, bladder and sexual function restored, or whether they'd like to be able to walk again, I think you'd probably find quite a lot of people would put them on an equal footing, if not perhaps say that they would prefer to have bowel and bladder function and sexual function over and above walking, because you can adjust. And there are many organisations out there that can help you adjust to your new life. That's not to say, of course, in the future we wouldn't all like to avoid paralysis if possible.
Now, this work was done, as I understand it, the research primarily conducted at University College London, but actually the surgery carried out in Poland.
That's right.
Is that how science in this area tends to work, international collaboration?
I think there's nothing wrong with international collaboration. I think whatever and whoever is able to make that real breakthrough should be supported and commended. I think there is a lack of funding and support for people to go off and do this research.
Lack of funding for the research.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, if we can put a man on the moon, in theory, we've got the intellectuals, people out there who can find this breakthrough. They just need the resources to do that.
Although the surgeons said this was more difficult.
Apparently so, but you know, they're surgeons. They're qualified to do this. I think the point is we've got the knowledge out there. Let's invest in it. Let's find not just a cure for being able to walk again, but a cure for paralysis.
And just remind us, how many people are we talking about?
I think in the UK you're talking at least 40,000 people who are affected at the moment.
In wheelchairs.
Who are permanently affected by spinal cord injury, yes.
Raquel Siganporia, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.